Okay, hello everybody. Welcome to OSHWA's one of our OSHWA talks. Today we are talking with Michael Weinberg, one of our OSHWA execs, about certification. So Michael is going to lead us through just a discussion about what certification is, how it works, and show folks a bunch of different ways that you can learn it yourself. And this is part of the Open Hardware Month, which we are approaching the end of. There's only 7 days left, so this is us kicking off the final week of Open Hardware Month. Woo!
Celebrates.
And with that, yeah, take it away, Michael.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And thank you for letting me come and talk about certification, which is a program that we have been doing at OSHWA for a number of years now. And so there's a lot of people who love certification. There's a lot of people who are certification curious. And so hopefully this will be an opportunity for the people who are in the certification curious category to slide into the certification love category. So I will share my screen so you can see what I am talking about. All right, so the OSHWA certification program, what is it? What's going on? How do you do it? The certification program is designed to make it easy to certify that your hardware is open source hardware, and to make it so you can understand, like, both as a creator and as a user, that everyone is talking about the same thing when they talk about open source hardware. So just for some background and context, right? So for years, probably actually for over a decade now, there has been the open source hardware Open Gear logo, which is fantastic. Everyone loves the Open Gear logo. It's great. The problem with the Open Gear logo is that, one of the benefits of the logo is that nobody owns it. So people can do whatever they want with it. But one of the challenges is nobody owns it. And so people can do whatever they want with it. And so it can be hard to tell if you see the Open Gear logo exactly what it means, right? When someone says this is open source, what is their definition of open source? How are they thinking about open source? What does it mean? And so now, about 5 years ago, OSHWA, in response to a bunch of community concerns and requests, said, okay, well, we're going to keep the Open Gear logo. Open Gear logo is great. But what if we develop this new program that makes it really easy for people to make sure that they're following the OSHWA community definition of open source hardware? And when they see someone talking about open source hardware, to easily know that their definition of open source hardware is everyone's definition of open source hardware, and so everyone's on the same page. And so what the certification is really about is making it easy to make sure that when you hear someone say open source hardware, they are talking about the community definition of open source hardware. And what it uses is this two parts, this certification logo. So everyone who gets certified gets two things. They get the right to be able to use the certification logo, which is obviously different than the Open Gear logo, and they get a unique identifier for their hardware. And so anyone can say they're doing open source hardware. Anyone can use the Open Gear logo. But if you want to make sure that you're following the definition, you can go through the certification program and get this logo, get your unique identifier, and everyone knows kind of what you're talking about. And I'll show you in a second what this unique identifier does. It has some great properties. But that's what the certification program is really about. So if you are curious about the certification program, you can go to certification.oshwa.org. We've got, in addition, this is actually version 2 of the certification program site. I'll show you the kind of primary features of the site now. But one of the things that we did when we relaunched the certification site was to build in a bunch of educational features and information about how open source hardware works, how licensing works, how documentation works. So I'm going to touch on that briefly as well. But let's start where the action is, right? So if you come here, you've made open source hardware, you want to get your free open source hardware certification, the first thing you do is you click on Certify a Project. It's a big purple button right there on the page. And if you click on that, it'll bring you to the certification application form. So again, certification is free and hopefully very straightforward. And what you'll do is you will go down through this form. You'll tell us who you are. You'll tell us what country you're in. You'll tell us how to get in touch with you. And then you'll tell us about the project, right? What's the name? How is it described? Where can we find it on the internet? What kind of categories should it be part of? This will become relevant in a minute. Keywords, things like that. And then also you'll talk about the licensing that you use, right? Because the two big things to keep in mind with certification and meeting the definition are documentation and licensing. So you want to make sure that you have enough documentation for your hardware that someone else can understand what the hardware is, make their own version, modify it, and change it. And then also that everything connected to your hardware that is protected by intellectual property right is licensed in an open way so other people can use it. And I say everything, but I actually mean almost everything. You want to make sure that the hardware documentation, the hardware design itself is all openly licensed, that the software, if there is software, is openly licensed, and then the documentation itself is also openly licensed. There's this one fourth piece that you might have for your hardware, and that is your trademark, and that is the name of your hardware. And that is something actually you don't want to openly license, because one of the things that makes open source hardware powerful is that anyone can make their own version of open source hardware. But what that means is, if you're out on the internet, out in the world, and you see 10 different people who've made their versions of hardware, the way you figure out who made the specific one that is in your hands or that is in front of you or that's on a website in front of you is you look at the trademark. And so only the person who owns the trademark can use that special name for the hardware. Other people can make their own names. And so then you understand sort of who's responsible for the actual hardware. And that's important because, if you download software from 5 different sites on the internet and you do checksum and they're all the same, they're all exactly the same. But if 5 different people make hardware, it could be different in five different ways. And so it's important to know who made your hardware. So anyway, you'll go through the licensing. If you have questions about licensing, we have examples of projects who have used different licenses. We have a drop-down that has suggested licenses, and I can show you more about how to learn more about those elsewhere on the site. And then you answer a couple of questions, and these questions are really just like double-check questions, right? They're like, you have documentation, right? You have components, right? You have all these things, right? Check some boxes, and then you click submit. Now, when we were developing the certification program, there was actually a big debate as to whether or not the program should be kind of binary, right? Open or closed, or if we should have like tiers of openness. And one of the things that we decided to do was make it binary. Either it's open or it's closed. It's more straightforward. It's easier to understand. But a question that we get a lot from people is, hey, I have this open hardware. I have designed it, but it has a bunch of third-party components. Some of them are open. Some of them are not open. Can my hardware count as open source hardware? And the answer to that question is almost always yes. The idea behind the certification is the things that your user contribution, your creator contribution, the things that you control, you have an obligation to openly license. But if you don't control them, you don't have the power to openly license them. So as long as those components are generally available, which usually means that anyone can get them without signing an NDA, and you document them, right? You say, well, you need this, and this is where you can get it. Then you should be totally fine. So an open source hardware that meets the definition does not mean that every single component from every third party is open all the way through. What it means is your contribution, the pieces that you control, have been opened and are adequately documented. So anyway, you click submit, you submit your form, and then the review period is usually about 2 weeks. And the team that reviews certification applications, as I said, they're going to look at everything, but they're mostly going to look and see if your documentation has everything that it needs to have and that it is properly licensed. Once you get that, one of two things will happen. Either you'll get an email that says, great, you're all good. Here's the certification logo, go with it. But sometimes you'll get an email from the team that says, hey, we've been looking at your application, and it looks like your documentation isn't everything that it needs to be, or it looks like your license isn't everything it needs to be. And we'll work with you to help get everything up to snuff. So one of the things that the certification does is it's an easy way to kind of make sure that you're complying with all of the rules. And this isn't to say that there are like a million rules. Many times we get applications, it looks great, it all goes through, but sometimes we do need to say, well, we need you to kind of tweak this or tweak that. Once you get your approval, you'll get an email that says, hi, you've been approved, congratulations. You can use this certification logo, and here is your unique identifier. And what that also means is you will be included in the certification hardware list. And so this is the list of all certified hardware that OSHWA is certified. Now it's almost 2,000. As we say, it's on I think about 50 countries, every continent except Antarctica. We're working on Antarctica. You can see that you can search it through all these different categories. You can search it by country and see kind of all of the countries. Bulgaria is a very popular country in the certification. You can sort it. You can do all these things to see what's going on. So it also becomes a place where if you're looking for open source hardware, you can find it. And every piece of certified open source hardware gets this unique identifier. And so you can see the unique identifier is here, right? It has the country code and then just a numerical count up. And it also means that the URL for the open source hardware is just certification.oshwa.org/the UID. And so that means if you are a user and you have open source hardware that you want more information about, you can always go to the certification page and find more information. So what we find on the page for the piece of certified hardware, you'll see the name of the hardware, you'll see who stands behind it and how to get in touch with them over email. You'll get a brief summary of what it is, links to the project website, information about licenses, if there's versioning information there, project types, keywords. Some hardware has citations. So we do have hardware that is built on other certified open source hardware. And so you can see how this all fits together through the citations, if the citations exist. Another thing that we have for the certification project is an API. And so the API it's both a read and write API. And so on the right side, if you are trying to certify a lot of hardware, or you have a workflow that kind of integrates with open hardware certification, you can use the write API to automatically submit applications for certified hardware. And on the flip side, you can use the read API to access all the information in the certification directory. So you can make visualizations, you can display it if you've got a platform and you want to display different kinds of information about all the certified hardware. The API will work. It's really well documented. It's got all sorts of information in it. So I encourage everyone to check it out. The last thing I want to mention about the certification program, well, I'll mention two things. One is, as I said, when we rebuilt the platform, we decided to include a lot of information and answers to questions that people had about the certification process. And so if instead of going to the certify page, when you go to the main page, you click the big green button, what is certification? You'll learn a lot about the certification project and program. And also what we do is for the hardware and the software and the documentation, we have these pages that explain how the pieces fit in with open source hardware. Also how to think about licensing your hardware. So this will help you think about kind of how protectable the hardware is under various intellectual property laws, what the recommended options are for licensing, some example projects of who use that licensing, what the licenses mean. And so if you're not sure what licenses to use, you can always just go and look and say, well, there's another creator that I trust and they do this. And so we can follow them. And so we have that for, as I said, for software, for hardware, for the documentation, and also for the branding and thinking about how branding works and how design works. The last thing I'll mention is we also sometimes get questions from people about, in addition to our frequently asked questions, which I will also point you to, One of our frequently asked questions is about people who are developing hardware and want to release the hardware. So they're developing it in secret. Maybe it's a product or something that they want to launch it, and they want to be able to certify it at the time of launch. So they want to be able to announce the hardware is certified when they announce the hardware the first time. Maybe they have packaging. They want to integrate, the certification logo and their UID. And we do have a pre-release certification program. And so you can reach out to us at certification@oshwa.org to talk to us about that. Basically, the way that it works is you submit your private documentation in advance, and we issue you a provisional UID and certification certificate. And when you publicly announce, you let us know. We double check that all the documentation that you gave us matches the public documentation, and if it does, then we convert that into a full certification. So that's a thing that's always available for people. It can be really useful, like I said, when you are preparing a project. I guess the one other thing I will mention is kind of enforcement on the other side. What happens if you find certified open source hardware that you don't think meets the specifications, the definition, or if you certify your own open source hardware and someone comes and challenges it. One of the things that we really have designed the program to do is to try and kind of give everyone lots of opportunities to resolve those disputes. And so what will happen is we'll often get an email from people who say, hey, I saw this hardware and I don't think that it meets the requirements. And the first thing we'll do is we'll review that and just see, if it seems like the complaint makes sense. And if it doesn't, then we say, thank you for the complaint, but I think this is totally fine. But if it does seem like it's a problem, and this can happen because we don't have subject area specialists in every kind of hardware on the review team, then we'll reach out to the creator and we'll say, hey, we got a question from a user about this. What are your thoughts? And sometimes the creator will say, oh, that's a good question, but actually we address it over here, in which case we say, that's fine. Sometimes the creator will say, oh, actually, that's a good point. We failed to do that. We forgot to do that. We've updated the repo. And then we go back to the person who raises the concern and say, hey, and kind of go back and forth until everyone is comfortable, which is great. And sometimes we have a situation where the creator says, actually, we're not willing to update the documentation, or we're not going to respond at all, in which case we do revoke the certification. And so there have been a couple instances over the years where we've had hardware that has been certified, and then either someone has raised a concern and the creator has not wanted to engage with it, or sometimes the documentation has just gone down because the page is gone and they didn't want to repost it, in which case we revoke certification. One thing that we've started doing and we're doing a better job of is if we revoke certification, we have our own private backup version of the documentation, and we'll post that documentation if the original documentation is gone. So people who have that hardware can still go to it and explore it and see how it all works. So that's sort of certification in a nutshell. Hopefully that gives you a little bit of an introduction of how all this works and it makes sense. If there are questions, I'm happy to answer questions or touch on things that I may have missed.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Michael. That was amazing. I guess just to have some conversation about this a little bit. So when certification is happening, it takes about 2 weeks to certify, you said?
Yeah, there's a review process, and usually our goal is within 2 weeks you get a response. Sometimes it's a lot sooner, but certainly in most cases you get a response within 2 weeks.
Okay, and so the folks who review, they just kind of go through what's been submitted, and generally it's off the honor system of you're going to be telling us accurate information.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, again, one of the things that we thought about as an organization when we set this up is, should we set up, specialist committees for every kind of category that we have that could be certified? And we decided that we didn't want to do that, both to make the process faster and because it's a free system. And so we don't have the capacity to do that. And so what we do is we've got a team of people who are kind of familiar with hardware generally and know, in most cases, at a kind of high level, what kind of documentation should be there. But you're right. Like the kind of real testing is almost a kind of post-certification testing, where you have to meet an initial barrier to get certified, and then when users start using it, that's when we get feedback. And the system works, I think, so far has worked reasonably well. But there certainly have been situations where documentation that appeared to be adequate to the review team, when specialists, when users were really testing it, decided it wasn't enough. There's also plenty of times when documentation comes in and even the review team, which is not a specialist, looks at it and says, hey, this documentation probably doesn't have what it needs to have, either because the documentation isn't adequate, or sometimes the project isn't developed enough to kind of work yet. And we generally recommend people wait until they have a stable version of the hardware before they certify. Because if you make substantial changes to the hardware, we do recommend that you recertify. And the idea there is, you think about version 1 has a unique ID that then feeds back to the documentation for version 1. If you have version 2, it's helpful to have a different unique ID because that'll feed back to the documentation. And, obviously, the line between a substantial and a modest revision is more art than science. But in most cases, people on the team have a pretty good sense for that.
Awesome. So what can be certified? Like I mostly see, electronics, given what our community is, but do we limit electronics? What else can people do? What do we look for?
Yeah, that's a great question. We intentionally take a very broad definition of hardware, right? If it has atoms, we will certify it in most cases. So I mean, it's true, we do have a lot of electronics in there. We also have, I mean, there's a whole line of camping gear that's been certified. We have a bunch of people who do textiles and e-textiles that get certified. There's a bunch of musical instruments that have been certified. It really is incredibly broad. There's scientific equipment, there's educational equipment, all sorts of wearables. So it is really, we hope, and it's very much designed to be a welcoming space where anyone who has hardware that they want to share and document in an open way is very much welcome to be part of the certification program.
Amazing. Is there any big milestones that the certification project has hit in the last little bit that we should shout out?
Yeah, I mean, we just got a new piece, so it's, at the beginning of the project, it was one of the exciting things was we would get a new country like all the time, right? And as we have grown, we have gotten fewer new countries because, countries are being involved. Like, as I said, we're up to about 50 now. And so it happens less and less. But I think just last week, we got the first piece of certified hardware from Egypt, which was exciting. So welcome Egypt to the certification program. And we are seeing kind of more development in different parts of the world. And so it's exciting to watch it expand and grow over time and watch how not only kind of different countries and different communities within those countries are getting involved, but often we'll see like a whole slew of people, especially around maker spaces, really start to come in. So we have a very active community, I mentioned in Bulgaria, but we have a very active community in Mauritius. There's a makerspace in India that is in the middle of a kind of project sprint connected to Open Hardware Month. And so we're getting a bunch of stuff from them right now. It's fantastic to see people from all over the world applying open hardware to all sorts of different problems, right? From, we've got CERN that is certifying things that for all the kind of fancy physics things that they're doing. But we also have people who are certifying drying racks and other components for, things for just like everyday use. And so it's really great to see all of those pieces come together and say, yes, I am part of open source hardware.
Definitely. It's and you said that we're close to 2,000 certified projects.
We are getting very close to 2,000. So we'll find out. I think we're about 100 away right now. So in the not too distant future, maybe certainly hopefully by I mean, it comes in ebbs and flows, but it's certainly possible that by the Open Hardware Summit, we're basically at 2,000 pieces of certified hardware. And again, I mean, one of the things that I really like about the certification directory is that it gives you a sense of not only the kind of breadth of types of projects, but that geographical scope of where the hardware is coming from and how it really is coming from just all over the world. And so who knows what country the 2,000 piece of certified hardware will come from.
That's very fair. That it'll be exciting to see. I'm excited to find out. I'm so excited we got Egypt. I'm like, wow, Egypt.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, and it's like, and why not, right?
Yeah. I think that's all we're going to talk about today. As a reminder, we will be doing also a Twitter-based AMA around 4 p.m. Eastern today, where Michael's going to be taking over the OSHWA Twitter. So if you have any questions that have come up during this, or you've just had on your mind, that's the time to tweet them out right at OSHWA, like OSHWA Association, which is OSHW Association. That's the Twitter handle, and Michael will be there ready to answer those questions. So thank you so much, Michael. And thanks to everyone who tuned in and who is going to watch this later as it goes up on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much.
Get certified, everybody. Get certified.
Get certified.